Today, class, we are going to be talking about the three species of simple government. This from the substance of a speech delivered by James Wilson, Esquire, explanatory of the general principles of the proposed federal constitution upon motion made by the Honorable Thomas McKean in the convention of the state of Pennsylvania on Saturday, the 24th of November, 1787. That is its title. Mr. James Wilson, lawyer, signatory of the Declaration of Independence, framed much of the Constitution, smart man, said this. We're just going to read from a little bit from page 10, just within this box. You'll notice the S's look funny, but maybe I'll say F. Then let us examine, Mr. President, the three species of simple governments, which, as I have already mentioned, are the monarchical, aristocratical, democratic. In a monarchy, the supreme power is vested in a single person. In an aristocracy, it is possessed by a body not formed upon the principle of representation, but enjoying their station by descent, by election among themselves, or in right of some personal or territorial qualification. And lastly, in a democracy, it is inherent in the people and is either exercised by themselves or by their representatives. Each of these systems has its advantages and its disadvantages. I want us to notice three things. This word here, monarchical, aristocratical, and democratical. Difficult words to say over and over. And then notice that under the democracy, they are either exercised by themselves or by their representatives, called a representative democracy. Hold that thought. Today, we're going to have part two of a Christian's response to the political situation. Last week, it was, don't forget that God will be your stability. That was the point of last week. If I say something that is factually incorrect, please correct me. If I say something that is edifying and encouraging, please accept it. We are here to work together. May we leave here more equipped to serve God in whatever government or under whatever government system we find ourselves, even if it is in Georgia. A Christian's response to the political situation. We're going to start by looking at words. I'm glad John went over archon this morning because I'm going to too. In fact, he went over a bunch of words, and I'm going to go over, this first part is going to be word heavy. I don't normally do this kind of words, but this is fun. Okay, monarchy comes from rule of one. It's two words put together. These are all transliterations is what they are. From mono and arch, or archon, as John has pointed out this morning. Mono e mano. We know exactly what that, let's talk one-on-one, right? We don't even have to go over this monopoly. That one company rules the telephone sector or whatever it is. Alone. Jesus often went out to pray mono, alone. This word is all over the New Testament. So is arch. Remind them to be subject to rulers and to authorities. Remember this for later. Authorities. This was in our text this morning. All these words, almost all of them were in Ephesians chapter 2. Authorities. Remember that for a long time from now, later. But here's our word, rulers. And so we have monarchy, the rule of one. Now we have an oligarchy. The rule or a body of a few. The rule of a body of a few. That's what it is. You've got one, then you've got a few. This is made up from two words. We already have arch, that's ruler. Olig is the word for few, or the adjective of few. The workers, the harvest is plentiful, but the workers are olig, few. Now, Mr. Wilson talked about an aristocracy, which is actually part of an oligarchy. It is the rule of the best. The rule of the best. And don't they think that, right? That's the point. But they think that and in theory it can be the rule of the best. Yes, that's and patriarchy, right? That's the rules of the fathers. That's a rule of the few. And then a plutocracy, a plutocracy. This word, God, I forget exactly the word, but his riches, in the riches of his mercy. There's that Pluto right there. Okay, so here are the rich ones, the people who have some land. They might be the rulers. Now, this part, crassy, we want to look at this just for a second. See, there are some archies. There's a crassy, and there's a crassy over here. We want to look at this just for a minute to talk about whether or not you have a crassy or an archie. Okay, it's from kratos. Now, this is a Greek word. It means nothing to us other than this is what it comes from, and I want to go somewhere in just a minute. In the New Testament, it's used 7 times. 6 times of God, once of the devil. Jesus came to render powerless the one who had power over death. But of the King, of God, it's always rendered dominion. God doesn't have archy, he's got crassy. Okay? Dominion. May the dominion be his forever and ever. Here's our word. It's from kratos. Now, Revelation chapter 1. Last week, we read from this vision, and we said, John understands what's going on, and he probably was a little bit nervous, a little concerned what's going on, and God says, look at me. When you're going through the chaos, look at me. That was the context. We read 9 through 17, I think, or 18. Verse 8. Chapter 1, verse 8. I am the Alpha and the Omega, says the Lord God. Who is, who was, who is the one to come, the Almighty. I believe every version here that we're reading from today, unless you're reading from the Net Bible, uses the word the Almighty. Here's our word. This word is from pan. I love this word every time I read it. Pantocrator. Ooh, Pantocrator. Now again, normally I don't do this because it doesn't mean anything to us. But Almighty does. Right? And pan does pantheism. God is everything. A pandemic. Here's a combination of 2 words. A pandemic, all the people had it. A pandemic. So we have these things float around. But God is all power. That's what he is. He's got power. He's got all of it. Now I want to focus on this just for a second. Revelation is about God proving he has all power. This word is used 9 times. Pantocrator is used 9 times in the Bible. It might be 10 times in the Bible. 9 of them are in Revelation. They're all of God. 9 of them are in Revelation. He's trying to prove, I've got all power. In fact, at the end of Revelation, what happens? The beast and the false prophet, they come and they're going to fight, and boom, in one verse, they're all thrown in the lake of fire, and then the dragon joins them. That's it. I mean, if somebody has power, it's Satan. And guess what? He doesn't have all power. And when you don't have all power, you've got no power. And God is proving that again and again through the book of Revelation. Daniel. In Daniel chapter 2, Nebuchadnezzar has this dream. Nebuchadnezzar, king of Babylon, has a dream. The head of the statue is made of fine gold. Its breast and its arms, silver. Its belly and its thighs, bronze. Its legs of iron, and feet partly of iron and partly of clay. And then in verse 34, a stone was cut out without hands and struck the statue on its feet in iron clay and crushed them. And then this stone turns into a mountain. Daniel gives the interpretation. The last sentence of verse 38. Here's the explanation. Nebuchadnezzar, you are the head of gold. After you, there will arise another kingdom inferior to you, and then another 3rd kingdom of bronze, which will rule over all the earth, and then there will be a 4th kingdom. And right here, Daniel, through God, or God through Daniel, I should say, says, look, this is a history lesson before it happens. There's going to be 4 kingdoms. You are one of them. And then there's the Medo-Persians, and then there's going to be Greece, and then there's going to be Rome. Okay, it's one thing to know that this is going to happen. But there's a lot more going on here. Not only does God know it's going to happen, he's the one pulling the strings. That's part of why he knows. Look in verse 36. This was the dream. Now we will tell its interpretation before the king. You, O king, are the King of kings, to whom the God of heaven has given the kingdom, the power, and the strength, and the glory. Wait a minute. He's the King of kings, but there's actually a king over him. There's the guy with all, or the person, I should say, with all power, giving this kingdom to Nebuchadnezzar, and later on it will be taken away, given to his grandson, or his son, and then his grandson, and then the Persians, because God has all power. So we see God working in the kingdoms, the political kingdoms of the world. He's pulling the strings. I don't know how that works. Don't ask me, ask John. I don't know how that works, but I know God is in control. And he's up there pulling the strings. And when one government comes to rise in power and then another one falls down, God has something to do with it. At least he's allowing it, if not doing it directly. Daniel chapter 4. This is where Nebuchadnezzar has the dream that there's a giant tree and the birds of the field are feasting, and then God, or the angel, says, cut down the tree, and then the one who is the ruler is going to be crazy for a little while. The dream, its interpretation is, Nebuchadnezzar, you are a great king of a great country, but you're going to become prideful. God is going to humble you, and then later on he will bring you back and put you in power again. Verse 17. This sentence, that's not a grammatical sentence, this decree, is by the decree of the angelic watchers, and the decision is the command of the holy ones, in order that the living may know that the Most High is ruler over the realm of mankind, and bestows it on whom he wishes, and sets it over the lowliest of men. All I know is I have to remember this. When there's chaos going on, and there is, when there's chaos going on, remember, God's in control. Don't ever forget that he will be your stability. There will be chaos, but he will be your stability if you allow that. In Ecclesiastes, there is a passage that it's debated what exactly it means. And basically, most people fall on one of two interpretations. I'll tell you, I don't know which one's true. Ecclesiastes 5:8. If you see oppression of the poor and denial of justice and righteousness in the province, do not be shocked at the sight. That part's easy. Yeah, that's a no-brainer. We see it all the time, and we understand, look, this happens all the time. Now, his explanation is somewhat, how does this fit? For one official watches over the other official, and there are higher officials over them. After all, a king who cultivates the field is an advantage to the land. Verse 9 is easy. Yes, when you have a king doing the right things, everybody benefits. The second part, look, when you see corruption, don't be surprised. Why? Because one is looking over the other, and the other has people looking over him. Basically, it probably means one of two things. Don't be surprised because the entire system is corrupt. That could be it. Ecclesiastes is somewhat pessimistic at times, and that would be a pessimistic. Look, don't be surprised that there's corruption at this level because there's corruption throughout the whole entire government. Or it could be, don't be surprised, like Peter warns us, look, when you face hostility because of being a Christian, don't be surprised and entrust yourself to God. That could be the point here. Don't be surprised because that ruler has somebody looking over him and somebody looking over him, and God is watching over all of them. Whether or not that's what this verse means, that is true. And we can never forget that. Why? Because God has all power. It doesn't matter if you have an archicracy. God has all of it, and he's delegated. Now, the democracy. The rule inherent to the people. That's the word that James Wilson uses. The majority, often. Most often it's the majority. Sometimes it might be all, if all the people are citizens. Let's not get into the technical difficulties, but you've got the rule of the few, the rule of one, the rule of the few, and then the rule of the people at large for the most part. From Dema, or Demos and Crassy, we know what the Crassy is. The Dema is people or assembly 4 times in the New Testament. We've mentioned this earlier. There's either a direct democracy or a representative democracy. The Athenian democracy was direct. We need to vote. Shall we go to war? Go get the people. Lee, would you like to go to war? Vote now. Lee's in town. Lee votes yes or no. Ours is a representative democracy. Wilson, Adams, Jefferson, and others call what we have a representative democracy. And the idea is that we vote for the representative who then goes to New York or Albany or Washington or wherever they're going. The democracy is based on equality of all under the law. The equality of all. In fact, they did not call it a democracy. That wasn't their word, that's our word, or a later word. They called it isonomia, the last word I promised to get into. Almost. Nomia means law. Iso, you've heard this word before, this prefix. If you have a triangle with two equal sides, it is an isosceles. 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 Right? It's an equilateral. No, we have the equilateral triangle, which has all three. But if it has two sides equal, it is an isosceles. And the idea is, under the law, everybody is equal. We said this morning, I don't know if we actually said it, under the king, under the democracy, everybody's equal. We all have the same liberty. If somebody comes up to you and says, hey, do this, we say, who died and left you king? Or who died and left you few, the oligarchies? All right? No, we understand. You can't tell me what to do. We live in a democracy. That was fun. Note well. In the New Testament, God did not declare which system of government nations should set up. They are all three lawful expedients. Now, what I'm about to say may be one of the most controversial things I've ever said from this pulpit. But, if it is true, accept it. If it is not, point it out. Here it goes. If really only one system is based on equality and liberty of all, and God did not specify that one or outlaw the others, then what does that say about equality and liberty of all? Do you remember who we are? Americans. We even take off the A now. I don't even know why. Because we have the freedom to, don't we? I'm an American. The Athenians, the Romans were prideful of their families. The Athenians, their democracy. I have my rights. That's who we are. I have my rights. This is so much ingrained in us. But in reality, it is not a God-given right that we have our freedom. That's from this. I don't even have to go anymore. We'll continue for a minute. Liberty is an unalienable right. Okay, so let's go through this. Alienable means it can be separated. The Gentiles were aliens. They were separated. Now, this is a little bit of a pun. Some of the declarations of independence have un, some have in. There's an argument which one is proper. They both mean the exact same thing. Okay, so that's a little bit of a pun. But let's take this word. It's alienable. It's separable. Inalienable means it's not separable. You can't separate it. And that is what our Declaration of Independence says. But that is not true. Not God-given. Liberty is a privilege, not a God. It's like marriage. Does God say something about marriage? Yes. Can some people be married? Yes. Should everybody expect marriage? No. The same thing with liberty. All right, go with me. First, not all monarchies, oligarchies are bad. Let's get this for a minute. I know there can be some problems. When Rome transitioned from a republic to an empire, this is what one commentator says. I say commentator, not a biblical commentator. This man has no belief in the Bible. The republic of the past generations had done little to help the poor of the city, the landless, and the indebted, and the oppressed provincials. So here's the republic. Remember, self-rule. they're not doing what they should be doing. But under the empire, this focusing of power in the hands of the single Roman authority made it possible for greater order and pattern to exist in the Roman world. People with a sense of injustice or grievance now felt that somebody up there loves me. If only they could bring their problems to the notice of the emperor, then their troubles would be over. And Augustus did a great job. He did it. He knew this. And so he worked hard to at least present himself as though he cared. In Acts 24, we may, I stress may see this influence. Acts 24, this is under Tiberius, or Caligula, I forget which at the time. But it's under the Roman Empire, not the Republic. They call Paul and they bring charges against him. Verse 2. After Paul had been summoned, Tertullus began to accuse him, saying to the governor, "Since we have through you attained much peace, and since by your providence reforms are being carried out for this nation, we acknowledge this in every way and everywhere, most excellent Felix." So say they're buttering him up is what they're doing. But they're saying, look, because we have peace in our country. Now, some of your study Bibles will say that's a bunch of hogwash, they're just buttering him up. But if you read Josephus, you understand there are assassins running around, and Josephus says, Felix cleaned them up. There are robbers running around, and Josephus says, Felix cleaned them up. In fact, he'll say that he hung them all around the city, crucified them. That may be what this is talking about here. Look, we actually have some stability under you. It is possible. Deakes, the first king of Media. Here's what Herodotus says about him. He set himself up to practice justice ever more and more keenly, was always straight and just, the one man judging according to the rule of right. Hey, sounds good to me. The people said about him, "Let us set up a king over us. The country will be well governed. We shall betake to ourselves to our own business and shall not be undone by lawlessness." Sounds like a good time to live in there. And then he reigned for 53 years. He was very exact in his observance of justice, and they liked him. Who in here would choose voluntarily to live under King David? Yeah. And Hezekiah, and Josiah, and Jotham, not just King David. The point is that there are such things as okay or good monarchies and oligarchies. So we're saying, look, freedom is just a privilege. Yes, and get in your mind that there can be some good rule of one, rule of the few. Now I realize that there can be some abuse too. A single ruler can become so corrupt, absolute power corrupts absolutely, right? Yes, Mao, Stalin, Hitler, Pol Pot, right? And in America, 58 million abortions under a democracy. Now, do you think God is wondering, okay, this was voluntary and this was forced, so I guess I'll treat those differently? I don't get that impression. No, you see, a democracy can go off the rail too, can't it? All right, having said that, compare Isaiah 61. The point I'm trying to make from here is that freedom, liberty, is a privilege. It is not a right. Isaiah 61. Isaiah 61, the Spirit of the Lord God is upon me, because the Lord has anointed me to bring good news to the afflicted. I wonder what the good news will be. He has sent me to bind up the brokenhearted, to proclaim liberty to the captives, freedom to the prisoners. Liberty and freedom. That's what is coming in the future age. Yes, and you know how the Jews interpreted that. They took Jesus and they physically tried to make him a king because they were sick of paying taxes to Tiberius. They didn't want it anymore. We want political freedom. Jesus quotes this in Luke chapter 4. At the beginning of his public ministry, He quotes it in verse 18, "The Spirit of the Lord is upon me, because he anointed me to preach the gospel to the poor. He has sent me to proclaim release to the captives, recovery to the sight of the blind, and free those who are oppressed." Freedom and release. "And all the people who were unjustly imprisoned came out." No, the opposite. John went in. Wait a minute, Jesus, you got it all messed up. We're supposed to be free. It's not talking about literal freedom. It's talking about spiritual freedom. Later on, remember, they're paying taxes to the Romans and they hate it. And they say to Jesus, "Is it lawful to pay taxes?" And he says, "You give to Caesar what is Caesar's." And that ain't freedom. Slaves. 1 Peter chapter 2. 1 Peter chapter 2, verse, where am I? 18. Servants. Now, some of your versions will say slaves. The idea of this word here is a household servant. That is a slave. They had no liberties. They were not citizens. They were owned, and that is it. They had no freedom, no rights. Whether it's the word slave or household servant, it's the same idea. "Be submissive to your masters with all respect, not only to those who are good and gentle, but to those who are unreasonable. For this finds favor, if for the sake of the conscience towards God, a person bears up under the sorrows when suffering unjustly. For what credit is there if you endure it with patience, if you sin and are harshly treated, you endure it with patience? But if when you do what is right and suffer for it, you patiently endure it, this finds favor with God." Okay, slave, you are owned. You are not a citizen. You have no rights. And here comes your master. Not only is he your master and owns you, but this guy's unreasonable. He causes you to suffer. He treats you harshly. And that is a good time to say, "But what about my rights?" Here's a meme. Exactly. Here are the two slaveholders joking around about how they mistreated their slave. And then the slave says, "Yeah, what about my rights?" That's such a joke because they don't have any rights. They don't have any. Certainly not freedom. 1 Corinthians chapter 7, verse 21. "Were you called while a slave? Do not worry about it. Don't let it concern you." Well, that's interesting wording. If freedom and liberty is a God-given right, then that would be the first thing I'm worried about. And he says, don't worry about it. If you are able also to become free, do it. Yes, pursue freedom, but it is not a God-given, inalienable right. Children. Galatians chapter 4. Verse 1. "Now I say," this is totally foreign to us. It's foreign for many reasons. Number one, we don't have slaves. Number two, even if we had slaves, we would treat our children differently from slaves. Guess you didn't. "As long as the heir is a child, he does not differ at all from a slave, although he is owner of everything." And we say, what does that mean? Well, let's help ourselves out here. Roman patria potestas, that's the power of the father. Remember earlier I hinted at this. The Romans loved their family. They were so prideful of their family, especially the power of daddy. The Romans were aware that the Roman father had powers over his family, and especially his adult children, that were exceptional. The power of the father over the son, even though he's an adult, was so powerful that one of the consuls, like our president, same kind of power, generally speaking. One of the consuls became consul. One young man became consul. His father rode up to him on his horse and said, "I command you to command me to get off my horse." It's kind of a joke saying, "Hey, look at us, father and son." But the father commanded the president. And you know what the president had to do? Obey the son. The power of the Father was absolute. The power of life and death over his familia. Now, we use the word family just for our nuclear, is that the right word? Family. But they use it to include household, slaves, all that. That is his legitimate children, his slaves, his wife. Its members were subject to the judgment and absolute authority of the Father. The Son, under paternal father, had little more independence than a slave. A father could hand over his daughter in marriage to anyone he liked. What Roman morality demanded of the child was piety, you see the word there, respectful obedience of the type also demanded by the fatherland and the gods. Now, where is this condemned in the New Testament? Now, the abuses are condemned. You cannot murder. You cannot beat. But where is ownership, and to look at it from the other perspective, lack of rights condemned? It's not. In fact, by its regulation, it is actually sanctioned. Ephesians chapter 6, verse 5. Slaves, be obedient to those who are your masters according to the flesh, with fear and trembling in the sincerity of your heart as to Christ, not by way of eye service as men pleasers, but as slaves of Christ, doing the will of God from the heart, with goodwill render service as to the Lord and not to men, knowing that whatever good thing each one does, he will receive back from the Lord, whether slave or free. Masters, set all your slaves free. It doesn't say that. It says, you do the same things to them. Give up threatening and knowing both their master and yours is in heaven, and there is no partiality with him. It doesn't say, give up the slave. It says, you treat your slave that you own, who has no rights, justly. Because someday everybody will answer to God. Where in there is the slave demanding his rights? Where is the son under this odd system saying, no, Dad, I have rights? Where is the citizen saying to the government, I have rights? Consider the citizens of Rome. 1 Peter chapter 2, verse 13, submit yourself for the Lord's sake to every human institution, whether to a king as the one in authority, or to governors as sent by him for the punishment of evildoers and the praise of those who do what is right. For such is the will of God, that by doing right you may silence the ignorance of foolish men. Act as free men. Do not use your freedom as a covering for evil, but use it as bondslaves to God. Honor all people, love the brotherhood, fear God, honor the king. Okay, submit yourself to the government, is what it says. Okay. This is applied under the emperors Tiberius and Caligula. Remember, Jesus said, render unto Caesar that which is Caesar's. That's the same principle. Written under Emperor Nero. The emperor, this word emperor, comes from imperator, from or who had imperium, that is the right to give orders to those of lower status and expect them to be obeyed, which is from imperar. The word is to order, compare our word imperative. Now, this is the emperor. He is of a higher status, and when he speaks, they are to be obeyed. This person, who is of lower status, does not have the same rights as this emperor. It doesn't happen. And he's saying, respect this one. Submit to this one. But again, freedom is not necessarily a given in this situation. But I have my rights. No, not necessarily. In the empire, the imperator had absolute imperium in matters of marriage and in religion. In religion, they thought they were gods. They were supposed to be treated as. We declare. Now, again, that's regulated by the New Testament, okay? And up here, I want you to understand, when I say liberty, I understand that God requires we have freedom of religion, liberty. I understand that. But not, as we would say, complete liberty, absolute liberty, just to do whatever you want. No. Yes, the king is obligated to say, you pursue God. you find God. The king is obligated to say that. But the king is not obligated to say, and at the same time, I'm going to sign over all of my authority to you. He doesn't have to. Or the queen. In matters of marriage, slaves could not be married, not according to the law of Rome. Now, if you have two slaves who are married in the eyes of God, and the master says, I'm taking you, sir, and bringing you 1,000 miles away, and you will never see your wife again, do you know what the slave has to do? Go. But my rights! Ha! That's hilarious. The emperors were lawless and arbitrary. They were lawless. They were not following their own constitution despite appealing to it. Oh, I can rule because in the Constitution it says that you can have power. And that's a summary of their argument. But it was unconstitutional. They knew it. Brutus killed Caesar because Caesar went too far, and Brutus was a Republican. I want to go back to the Republic. Cicero was a Republican. I want to go back to it. They were arbitrary. So, this is actually before there were emperors, but after. It's in a period of transition. There were three rulers who had all power, basically three kings. A woman, a man, a husband was declared guilty of some charge and banished from citizenship in Rome. He was innocent. His wife went to Octavian, Augustus, who was one of the three rulers with Mark Antony and another guy, and says, my husband is innocent, here's the proof. And Octavian said, you're right, he is innocent, and called him back. Full reinstatement of citizenship, everything. But Octavian then went out of country, up north to the England area, leaving the other two rulers, and this woman went to the third ruler and said, can you please call my husband back now? And you know what he said? I don't think so. And then you know what he did? He beat her. And he dragged her through the streets, beating her and beating her. And she would not give up. She showed him this paper. My husband is innocent. Octavian said he's innocent. And the ruler said, I don't care. And you know when he was punished? Never. He was never punished for it. Now, after a while, the husband did come back, but it was totally arbitrary. Where are my rights? Woman, I'll give you another right if you keep that up. And he got away with it. Where are my husband's rights? About this word king here. Honor the king. There's our word archon, or arche, however you want to look at it. 1 Samuel 8. Here's a description of living under the king. I want you to listen for all the rights that people have, especially the right of freedom and liberty. First of all, I got to get out of 1 Kings and turn to 1 Samuel 8. I'm going to skip down to verse 10. By the way, remember this for later. When they're in the period of the judges and say, we want a king. And Eli says, or Samuel says, look, God, they've rejected me. And God says, they have not rejected you. They've rejected me. Remember that for later. Verse 10. Samuel spoke all the words of the Lord to the people who asked him of a king. And he said, this will be the procedure of the king who will reign over you. Here's our same word in the Septuagint, king. He will take, we don't even have to read anymore, do we? Of my liberty. And this is under God's theocracy. You don't have liberty anymore. You asked for a king. When you asked for a king, you gave up the privilege to. They will take your sons. Verse 12, appoint for himself commanders of thousands. Verse 13, he will take your daughters. 14, he will take. Verse 15, he will take. Verse 16, he will take. And he won't stop taking and taking and taking. And you cannot say to him, I have my rights. You have lost it. The word authorities. Remember I said a long time ago, remember this word authorities from Titus. Respect the king and the authorities. Matthew chapter 8. What's it like to live under this kind of authority? Here's the same word, Matthew chapter 8. This is the Gentile centurion who comes up to him and says, look, heal my son. And Jesus says, I'll come And he says, you don't even have to come, because he understood authority. And Jesus was amazed. Look at this guy. He knows more than you guys do. But look what he says in verse 8, verse 9. I also am a man under authority. In other words, like he responds or he answers to the person above him. And he also has people underneath him, with soldiers under me. And I say, this is all he does. I say. And this one, to this one, go. And guess what this one does? He goes. Well, what about my rights? Well, I know this is talking about in the military, but he is under authority. And this passage up here, and others say, you are under authority. And when the person in authority says go, then in this situation you have no liberty. Verse 9, come, and he comes, and to my slave, do this, and he does it. That is what it's like. What about my rights? John, on the Isle of Patmos, go. Go there, sit there. Well, what have I done? I'm innocent. Okay, what about Paul? Paul was actually a citizen, right? Nothing bad ever happened to Paul, did it? How many years did he spend in prison? At least 4. 4 years. Innocent, no charges leveled against him, and the accusers didn't even show up. And Felix, back in Acts chapter 24, Acts 24, verse 22, Felix, having a more exact knowledge of the way, put them off and said, when Lysias, the commander, comes down, I will decide your case. Verse 23, then he gave orders to the centurion for him to be kept in custody and yet have some freedom. Wait a minute. Am I guilty or innocent? You're in limbo? Well, what about my rights? I'm a Roman citizen. And when Paul had rights, did he assert them? Set me free. Wasn't right. I can make my way in prison all the way to Caesar. That's a right. But freedom was not a right. I demand my rights. My God-given inalienable rights I demand. No. Not when it comes to freedom. That's not one of them. God initially set up a mixture of a patriarchy and a critarchy. Has anybody ever criticized somebody? Are you doing it right now to me? That means you've judged them. There was a critarchy, right? There were the patriarchs of the 12 tribes, and then the judge. And the judge went around and he did a circuit and he judged them. Sometimes it was good, sometimes it was bad. You ever read the book of Judges? You're scholars? I know you have. The issue is not the system, it's the ruler's dedication to God, isn't it? Right? They have not rejected you, they've rejected me. And that's the cycle in the book of Judges. Under this system of governance, when did it work? When they put their trust in God. Without God, all forms of governance will eventually fail the people. That's it, because it's people. You're either relying on God or people. People will not be reliable. With God, anyone can succeed. I don't mean to be absolute here. Maybe there's something. I know a theocracy could not, because God says, I'm paraphrasing and summarizing, separation of church and state. Okay? The church does this work, the state does this work, and they don't mix. All right. So a theocracy wouldn't work, but that wouldn't be with God, would it? So I need to be careful what I'm saying. But the point is, if you're trusting in God, then any government that God allows, if you're trusting in God, it's going to work. Whether it's a monarchy, an oligarchy, or democracy. A democracy, right? Proverbs 14:34. You all remember this. Western democracy and individual freedom exalts a nation, and all others are a disgrace to any people. Right? That's what the text says, isn't it? No. But we act like that. No. Righteousness exalts a nation, and sin is a disgrace to any people. That's what the text actually says, right? But my liberty, I've shifted my focus from righteousness to personal freedom. And I've got to get it back to righteousness in God, righteousness in God, righteousness in God. Now, we may live under a system where we have freedom, okay, but it's not a God-given liberty. It is only a privilege like marriage. Yes, we love marriage. Some of you hopefully will get to experience marriage, whatever God wants, and it's the same thing with liberty. Note well, a Christian can live faithfully to God no matter what system of governance he lives under and no matter its dedication to God. Look, I live under communism and they all hate God and they're atheists. I can still live faithfully. We know people, right? Whether as a nation we are going to ascend to greater heights or decline and fall, it may be better in a democracy. I just don't know. That should be a question mark. It may be better in a democracy. I don't know. I'd like to think it is. But don't let freedom become an idol. What is the reaction of the Christian to the political situation? It doesn't matter which political situation you're under. You trust God and you do not let freedom become an idol. That's where this whole lesson is going. In Jeremiah, a couple more passages and then we'll be done. In Jeremiah 27, Zedekiah is king. He is the last king that will reign essentially the last king that will reign in Jerusalem. Babylon is coming. God tells them, among other places right here, you submit to Babylon. That means loss of freedom. You are no longer autonomous, self-ruling. No. Now you'll submit. You lose your freedom. In the beginning, verse 1, in the beginning of the year of the reign of Zedekiah, the son of Josiah, the king of Judah, this word came to Jeremiah, saying, thus, make for yourself bonds and yokes, and put them on your neck. Send word to the king of Edom, the king of Moab, the king of the sons of Ammon, to the king of Tyre, to the king of Sidon, by the messengers who come to Jerusalem, to Zedekiah, the king of Judah. Here comes Babylon, and they're trying to form a coalition to fight against Babylon. And God sends Jeremiah and says, you go to them with this demonstration. Put yourself in stocks, in a yoke, slavery, no freedom. You go there and you tell them, God says, you submit to Babylon. Submit, no freedom. And if you don't, God says, I will destroy you in the land where you stay. What did Zedekiah do? You know what he did. What happened? Zedekiah coveted his freedom. And he allowed that coveting so much to take over him that he went against what God told him to do. It became his idol. Here's the point. We love our freedom. Don't let it become your idol. It is in us, especially those of us who have tasted of it for so long. Don't let it become your idol. Galatians chapter 5, and I understand this freedom is initially and primarily about freedom from the law of Moses. It was for freedom that Christ set us free. Therefore, keep standing firm and do not be subject again to the yoke of slavery. Talking about the law of Moses. Verse 13, you were called to freedom, brethren. Do not turn your freedom into an opportunity for the flesh, but through love serve one another. They were free from the law of Moses, and they went to perfect selfishness. And it was so much selfishness that they were mistreating their Christian brethren. And he says, yes, you're free from the law of Moses, but don't let the pendulum swing too far. Don't let it happen. Look, I'm going to twist this just a tiny bit. I'm going to insert a word here and combine this with 1 Corinthians chapter 7. You were called in freedom. Everybody here was called in freedom. Or while free. Do not turn your freedom into an opportunity for the flesh. And if you start to lose it, do not let it become an idol. This is the point. 1 Peter 2:16. We've already read this. Submit yourselves for the Lord's sake to every human institution, whether to the king as one in authority, or to the governors as sent by him for the punishment of evildoers and the praise of those who do right. For such is the will of God, that by doing right you may silence the ignorance of foolish men. Act as free men. Do not use your freedom as a covering for evil, but use it as bondslaves to God. I'm losing my freedom. What do I do? Well, you can try to stop the flow. Yes. And there's a way you can try to stop the flow where it becomes evil. When you put too many of your resources to that and you remove your focus from God and all you're thinking about is my freedom, my freedom, my freedom, I've got to stop this, then you've gone too far. In the name of freedom. Be careful. Closing thoughts. I do not intend to imply that a coming drastic doomsday scenario of complete loss of freedom is coming. I don't mean to intend that, to imply that. At the same time, I do fully intend to speak to small yet increasing losses of freedom that are real and they hurt. Our government already operates as though it owns us, or is beginning to. It is operating as though it owns us. Compare laws about soda. You can't drink that. Seatbelts, health care, all from the perspective that the government owns us, is taking care of its property, and wants to reduce its cost of maintaining us. You see that? That's the part. I want to reduce my cost of maintaining my stuff. And so I start making rules. That's the government, and that's us. It is already acting as though it owns us. So, their freedom is being taken away. I'm a Christian. What do? I don't let it become an idol. I do not let freedom become an idol. That's number one. I do not mean to preach doomsday. Maybe things will get better. They are not so bad right now. Whether they do or do not get better, do not allow yourself to become distracted, that God is your stability. I'm going to close with a quote from a man who is a faithful Christian and an elder. He's an ex-Army helicopter pilot. He was wrestling with the same things. I happened upon a class and overheard him in the class. And I quote from, it's audio, he didn't prepare this, so I'm trying to take what he says and capture it in writing, but you'll get the feel of it. As I look at the United States and what we are doing to the Constitution and what we are doing to our way of life, that I've grown up thinking about how we are supposed to live as patriots, it's very, very easy to get so distracted and get so frustrated by the political correctness and where this nation is going, and allow it to obfuscate really what our true purpose is, and that it's to be followers of God. And the eventuality of them taking our weapons, our firearms, our money, our freedom, it's going to happen. And we have got to let that go. That doesn't mean we cannot use legal means to try to fight that, and also try to encourage people, as many as we possibly can, to turn back to godliness and respect for the law. But we cannot allow that to get us distracted from really what God's purpose is. You've listened well. If I have said something that is factually incorrect, please help me understand the truth. If the gist of what I have said is true and from God's Word, please accept it and live by it. Thank you for listening.